This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. Her name is Katy Faust. So she is a children's rights advocate, and she's also the founder and president of Them Before Us, which is a global movement defending the children's right to their mother and father. And so she's written several books, but the one we're focusing on today is really kind of the center point and scaffolding of our conversation, which is Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. And so here's the thing. I was first introduced to her earlier this year when she was on the Jordan Peterson podcast. So I listened to just about all those episodes. And I was just struck at how forcefully she was speaking on these things and really a lot of topics and philosophies that are kind of incendiary and, are kind of third rail topics for a lot of people, and just how she approached the interview. And I was just like, she's going to be perfect and fantastic for our podcast. Reached out to her team. We got this squared away. I think we're going to end up doing an hour. Then I reached back out to our team. As I dug even further into her work, I was reading her books. I was like, we're going to need at least an hour and a half. So I think we even went over that. But the funny thing about it is she wasn't always this way, right? As you're about to see. She was a pastor's wife and full-time stay-at-home mom. And then she kind of created this secret blog because by her own admission, she was too chicken to come out with some of these opinions because she had some very strong opinions about children and the rights they should have and how families should operate and things like that. But a gay blogger outed her and doxed her and put her information out there. It was causing problems in her home church and all that. And so she was kind of stuck with this dissonance of do I keep going or do I, shut this down now that I've been outed? And some godly men in her life said, no, you're going to keep going and you're just going to go bigger. And so we talk about children's rights. What is that? Why do most people know about pro-life stuff or pro whatever the thing is, anti-trans stuff, but they don't really know about this pro-children's rights thing? And we talk about her focus mainly being that children have a right to their mother and father. And that's kind of the bedrock of a lot of things that we talked about. It's children's rights versus what adults think are their rights. But then we talk about natural rights versus legal rights. But then we get into a lot of incendiary topics. So we talk about fatherlessness and the literal epidemic that is, why biology matters so much, why it's so essential for kids to have access to their mother and their father, but also how gender matters, because in modern society, we talk about equality and we use it in the same breath as sameness. Well, men and women can be equal, but we're certainly not the same. How does that reflect how people view toxic masculinity, right? What most people would say is toxic. But then we talked about why marriage is so important and the scourge that divorce is, certainly no-fault divorce and the issues that creates downstream for the children. We get into same-sex parenting and how, the issue in those circumstances is not necessarily the gay parents, it's the missing parent. It's either the biological mom or the biological dad. And then if you stick with us, well over an hour into this, we talk about IVF and surrogacy. And I know when I've talked about IVF and surrogacy before, it's up there at the tippy top of the things that have caused a lot of issues for people in my audience, because I've gone on record to say my issues, the issues with the IVF process, the moral implications of creating a whole bunch of human beings that will never see the light of day outside the womb, in doing that on purpose, the issues that it causes with surrogacy and, removing the types of mothers from a child's life because, a kid has a genetic mother, a birth mother, and a social mother, and that should be all the same person. And whenever you do surrogacy and IVF, in some of these cases, you're in effect separating all of these women and making some of those women even optional. And so we get into that, and she has very, very, very strong opinions on that, really strong opinions on everything. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. I'm sure you will as well. So guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Katy Faust, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Really good to be with you and all of your BJJ boys.
We got a lot of jiu-jitsu guys in the audience, and they are super psyched, but they don't know it yet because maybe they're not familiar with you, even though I did tell them about you in the introduction here. But you and I hit it off air. I figured, let's go ahead and start this recording. Let's get this thing going.
No, good idea. We're going to give you gentlemen a different kind of rolling today.
Yeah, it'll be a different kind of rolling, but it'll still be aggressive, right? You're still going to come out with things, maybe busted ears or noses. We'll see how it goes. Yep. But you have such an interesting story, Katy, and I first became aware of you and the work that you've done whenever you appeared on the Jordan Peterson podcast, and I was like, oh my gosh, we got to find this gal and get her on the show. And your start to what you're doing now doesn't really fit because your start was, okay, pastor's wife, full-time stay-at-home mom. We love those gals in our audience. We have a lot of them in our audience, actually. But then you went from that to secret blogger, right? And so it's like, all right, we're going to do this thing behind closed doors. And you actually said, I think in one of your other interviews that you start, or maybe in one of the books, that you started the anonymous blog because you were too chicken, right? You used the word chicken.
Totally.
You were too afraid of the negative backlash. So let's start there. How do you go from just this, quiet gal who's just going to take care of the home and take care of all that kind of stuff to, no, I'm going to start throwing bombs into culture?
Yeah, the one word, rage. I just became enraged. And like I am at nature, like a peacekeeper and a grace giver. Like offline, if the world was not on fire, all I would do would be read the Bible and pray with people and go sit near them when they're in the hospital or when they just got the diagnosis or they just found out that their husband, committed adultery or whatever. Like I just am a shepherdess. That's all I want to do. I don't like to lose friends. I don't like to create conflict. I just want to bring as many people into my personal space as possible because I want to give them access to God. So this is out of my kind of natural disposition, except when you victimize the vulnerable. And that is what I saw. That had been happening on a mass scale through abortion for a long time. But in some sense, I was like, you know what? There's enough people fighting that. There's so many pro-life organizations and I'll support them and I'll cheer them on. But I feel like there isn't necessarily the need in terms of the space to get in there. But it was in the area of marriage and family where I saw victimization of children and nobody speaking up about it, or at least speaking up the way that I thought was going to be the most effective, which is from the perspective of defending their fundamental natural rights to be known and loved by their mother and father. There were plenty of people pushing back on gay marriage because it was, an affront to a religious institution, or it was going to, mean that somebody might have to bake a cake that they don't want to bake, which is not necessarily, like, in my opinion, the way to motivate people to get involved in the culture war. To me, I was like, no, this is about victimization of children. So I did start the anonymous blog because I wanted to speak up, but I didn't want the heat. And thank God, I was able to develop a lot of these ideas and find the holes in my argument in relative obscurity for a couple of years. And then when I was outed by a tolerant and loving gay blogger who ended up talking to members of my church to get me to shut up, by that time I had a pretty well developed message and understood the scope of what this project needed to entail. So yeah, I got into it slowly. And I'm really grateful for that in some ways.
So let's talk about that a little bit more because, you were outed. So you thought you could kind of, in your own way, you hide behind your keyboard and kind of do that whole thing anonymously. But I'm also interested by what you said because, yes, in the conservative space or the Christian space writ large, there are the pro-lifers that really advocate for the unborn. There are the people that advocate for, normal families and, not going into gay marriage and just like different types of ministries. And so with like my show, we cover faith, culture, politics, not necessarily in that order, and not always a third. We cover what we cover. And so I have opinions and philosophies on a wide range of different topics. And a lot of those topics I go really, really deep on. But ultimately, I'm here to equip men to push back darkness. And so people would say, well, why aren't you, like I had a guy that like, hey, he invited me, hey, come do ministry with me at Eagle Pass. I'm going out there to share the gospel. And I said, man, it sounds like that's the race that God has for you, like Godspeed. And he responded back like, oh, you're just some fake podcaster. I invite you to come down to do the real work of the gospel and you won't do it. It's like, that's your race, brother.
That's right.
Like, run your race and let me do what I can to help you run your race. That's not my race. And so, I think that that's something that you could flow on even a little bit as well, because there's a billion different things you could have done, Katy, and you could have just stayed anonymous and served your household and did exactly what Eve was told to do, which was to be a helpmate fit for Adam. But you've kind of evolved past that. And I don't mean that negatively to anyone who's doing that, but that's just the trajectory that your life took.
Yeah, well, and, even before I jumped into the, most contentious culture war issues of our time, I learned through ministry that every need is not a call. There are needs all around us. And it's very hard, especially I think for women, to not respond to every single need in their world because we are helpmates, because we are natural, like shepherdesses, because we look a little bit more naturally towards the needs of others. And if there's a need in our world, we want to meet it. So I was very close to the edge of burnout in ministry for a long time because every need felt like a call to me. So I had to learn that in my personal life, that just because there's a need, that doesn't mean I'm called to do it. And certainly that is the case when it comes to kind of looking at all of the different ways that culture is going astray. That's a very gentle way of putting it. And so I didn't feel called to the anti-abortion work. But I will tell you, I could not escape the call to fight on behalf of children in matters of marriage and family. Part of it was because I did feel like I had the angle that needed to be amplified, not me, but because God had developed it in me through a lot of decades of interacting with people that disagreed, holding fast to the word of truth in a way that does not unnecessarily trigger, but neither will allow you to take one step away from God's truth. But then also reading and watching and seeing and following what was happening in the conversation, the national conversation around marriage and family and reproductive technologies. And that's a lot of times how you find your calling. Is you will watch what's happening in the space that you're curious about. And you'll say, oh man, I love his work and I love her writing and I love the way she thinks. And this podcast is my favorite. And then at some point you're going to go, why isn't anybody doing that? This is the thing that nobody's doing. There's such a vacuum. There's such a hole here. That's a very good indication that is God saying, yes, and you are going to fill that hole. So that's what happened with me. Like I was watching the national conversation, especially around gay marriage. I was listening to churches trying to figure out that balance between grace and truth. And I felt like no church was getting it exactly right. It was either so much grace that they would never speak up, or so much truth that they closed their heart to people that disagreed. You know, on the national conversation, it was obsessively focused on the adults in the pro-gay marriage camp. And in the conservative camp, it was obsessively focused on Christian adults and their rights and what they were going to lose. And it was like, good God, people, stand on the word of God, because child protection is and always has been one of the manifestations of our pure and undefiled religion before God. This all has to be about kids. So you'll probably, you know, as you're listening to this podcast and the other ones, figure out like, okay, I do have these things that are stirring up in me, this calling that I have. And it's probably going to be something that you feel like nobody else is doing. That's a good indication that you should probably step into that space.
Well, it's what no one else is doing, and are you doing it uniquely? I get asked all the time, like, hey, Kyle, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. You know, what's your advice for me? And they're thinking I'm going to list out some, you know, here are some good to-dos and best practices. And I'm like, yeah, you probably shouldn't do it. And they're like, wait, what? I'm like, well, there's 6.5 million podcasts already. Are you going to be saying it and thinking about it differently, whatever it is, than everybody else? And I mean, when you look at any culture, and you can go back to tribal cultures, when you worship the creation around you, even if you don't acknowledge it as creation, right? When you worship the earth, when you worship the sun, it always ends up with child sacrifice, does it not? Right? Because you have these people groups that, you know, their crops aren't getting watered because it hasn't rained in a while. And so what do? They sacrifice even more children to whatever deity that they've made up. And it one thing as well is a lot of people find themselves in your position where they don't want to, I think you said it, unnecessarily trigger somebody or needlessly trigger somebody. And just by how I operate in the world, I will trigger people just by my general disposition and how forward I am. But a lot of the world, it's necessary to trigger people, because if somebody is going to repent and believe and put their full faith, the full weight of their faith into the gospel of Jesus Christ, goodness gracious, something had to trigger that decision. For some people, it's a needle in their arm with a belt wrapped around it, and then they almost died, should have died, but didn't. Oh my gosh, that's it. And for other people, they're just in Awana and they're 9 years old and they realize, oh my gosh, I'm a wretched, black-hearted sinner. I'm not a, perfect little snowflake. And if I don't have Jesus, I have nothing. And so there's that necessary triggering that needs to go on. But for you, I'm curious, Katy, because I've only known bold Katy. Bold, public, very pointed, not needlessly divisive, not offensive for the sake of being offensive, but very, very precise and pointed in your positions. And we're going to get into them today. And gosh, it's going to be triggering for a lot of people. Just tell me about the process of your own maturation to where it goes from like, I'm too chicken to make sure people know that my actual name is here, to now to where it's like, not only am I going to sign my name to it, I'm going to stamp it, double stamp it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't come out by choice. Like, I was outed by this gay blogger who then tried to punish people at my church that didn't even know that I was blogging, so that I would shut up. Because at that point I had gained a bit of a following, even though I wasn't writing under my own name. And I went to the elders of my church and I was like, you guys, I am so sorry. Because now our church is getting all kinds of negative Yelp reviews by people that have never even been there before. And the people are discovering that their names and addresses and pictures are online on some powerful gay blogger. And I mean, I came to them and I said, I will stop if you want me to stop. I mean, like, if I am Jonah and you need to throw me overboard so that the storm will cease, I totally understand it. I will stop. And then the very good men at my church said, yeah, you could stop or you could go really big.
Yep.
And I was like, okay. And so, shout out to good men who are like, we're not going to shrink back. And, every need is not a call. They didn't all suddenly feel like they needed to start blogging about this, but they felt called to protect, one of their sheep. My husband was the pastor of the church at the time, but, we kind of removed ourselves from that decision and let the other men make that choice. And so what did I end up doing? I never had like a 5 or 10 year plan. My plan was obey God every day with all of my might. And so I would get email requests like, do you want to go lead a workshop at the United Nations? Will you come to Australia and speak to our members of parliament? Will you submit an amicus brief to the Supreme Court? So I just started saying yes to whatever showed up. And it grew not because I was planning and ordaining to someday be on the advisory board for Jordan Peterson's new project, but just because I was like, I'm going to respond to whatever it is that the Lord puts in my path today, and I'm going to do it zealously and with excellence as much as the Spirit will allow me to. So that's the story. It's kind of a story of incrementalism and reactiveness, not necessarily proactiveness. And there has been a thickening of my skin that has needed to develop, but I still feel worried about what people say. And I still get my feelings hurt if somebody says, you're a hateful bigot. And I'm like, I'm actually not. I'm really, really nice. But I've just had to learn to, like, my feelings don't determine my actions like obedience determines my actions.
Well, and Katy, you mentioned like 5 to 10 year plan and all that. I always tell people, I'm like, God has to look at your 5 to 10 year plan for your life and think that is just super precious. Like, oh my gosh, you don't think you're going to get sick. Oh my gosh, you don't think you're going to get fired. Oh my gosh, you think all the people around you are still going to be alive and still like you. What are you talking about? And one of the same things with me is I have a tendency to focus on the negative. I am very pessimistic, but I try to use my pessimism as a superpower, right? Mm-hmm. So, if you and I are working on a project together, I'm just going to assume you're not going to do your part, because if you don't do your part, then I'm right. And if you do your part, then I get to be pleasantly surprised, right? So I try to use my pessimism as if at first you don't succeed, lower your expectations. Sure. And so but ultimately, I think people don't understand that when you put yourself at the tip of the spear. My buddy Joe B. Martin, pastor out of Florida, he says it best. Whenever he was thinking about getting into ministry, he didn't say, God lighten my load. He said, God broaden my shoulders, right? Mm-hmm. Help me to be able to shoulder more burden. And guess what? You got to be surrounded by godly women, in your case, godly men, in my case, that when you're under the bar and the weight is simply too crushing for you to hold it by yourself, well, guess what? You got a couple of buddies that get up under each side, lift a little bit of that burden off of you, but we still keep going in the same direction. And so the way we're going to structure today's conversation, we're actually going to do it off of one of your 3 books. So I've got 3 of your books here. I've got Pro-Child Politics, which is solid. I've got this one, great title, Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City. But the scaffolding for our conversation today is going to be this book, your first book, Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. And I just got to tell you, I've been in this conservative space, this Christian space for a very, very long time. I don't know that I had ever heard about that. I had heard of the men's rights movements, which are all these dorks taking red pills and, looking at guys like Andrew Tate like he's a savant. And then I've heard of all these movements, but I'd never quite heard about the children's rights movements. Like, where have I been? I've been paying attention. I've been reading the books, but it's just not been right in front of me. And the main focus of your work, I think this is a quote from your website, in the context of family, children have a right to their mother and father. When this right is ignored, children are commodified. They become possessions to be cut and pasted into any and every romantic adult relationship. That may actually be a quote from the book.
No, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. You're hired. Well, literally, I'm going to just bring you on to do all of our promo.
I'm just going to be your hype man. I'm going to be your little John and be like, all right, pay attention to what Katy's saying. But there's actually a follow-up quote from the book, which is, the children have been required to make sacrifices to accommodate the adults. And that was like an anvil, from an old Looney Tunes cartoon, just bong, hit me in the head. I'm like, of course, we are violating children so that we can be more comfortable, so that we can be happy, so that we can be fulfilled, whatever that means. And so let's talk about, okay, how do you go, okay, I'm going to do this blog. I'm going to talk about the things that I like. I've got some thick rhino skin now in these different areas. But you know what? No, we're going as deep. We're going to go to the center of the earth as it pertains to the children's rights movement.
Yeah, I had a lot of discipleship along the way because I didn't come. When I started blogging, I was like, kids need moms and dads. Like, I had worked in youth ministry for decades, and I knew the harm of children who lost their mom or dad or went through a family breakdown or their mother abandoned them or their father ran off with the secretary. And I sat with those. I mean, I'm the shepherdess. I sat with those kids while they mourned and cried and hated themselves. That's the problem is you lose your mother or father. A lot of times it's not anger at the mother and father. It's self-loathing. Self-loathing, right? There must be something wrong with me. My father must not have wanted me. I'm the reason why my parents' marriage broke up. Or what's so wrong with me that my mother decided to take off and form a new family with somebody else, and now she doesn't even talk to us anymore. I mean, kids interpret that as personal rejection. So I knew that kids needed their mom and dad, but when I first started writing, I didn't know that they had a natural right to their mom and dad. I wasn't even familiar with the term natural rights. I didn't know that it was a whole system of academic and philosophical study, but it is. It is natural rights is the basis on which Martin Luther King Jr. made his appeal to our civil government to level the playing field for our Black brothers and sisters. So this is a philosophical stream that allows you to, in essence, create moral imperatives without appealing to special revelation, right? You are looking at the natural world and coming up with what we ought to do based on looking at the natural realities of the world. So based on that natural reality, you can come to the conclusion that Americans have a right to free speech and a right to religious liberty and a right to self-protection. I mean, those are natural rights. We didn't get those from the government. The government exists to protect those. Through that same philosophical system of understanding natural rights, you can also understand that children have a right to life and children have a right to be known and loved by both people responsible for their existence. Now, many of your listeners are probably familiar with the child's right to life, and that doesn't sound very foreign. But the reason why you're like, how have I never heard this before? It is because outside of children's right to life, we don't talk about children's rights. Okay. The other side does. If you Google the term children's rights, you are not going to find them before us. You are going to find International Planned Parenthood's curriculum on children's right to sexual pleasure. You are going to find a variety of different public school manuals that talk about children's right to a transgender identity hidden from their parents at school. You're going to see a child's right to access pornographic material in their libraries. So the left has so co-opted and adulterated the idea of children's rights that it actually was a bit of a strategic decision for us to use that name in our, and we decided to go for it because number one, it's true. Number two, it is the right framing. And number three, this term needs to be redeemed. So we do spend quite a bit of time in that very first chapter of Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement, defining what is a right? How do you know whether or not something is a right? Because just because somebody really, really wants something, this is how it works with adults. If an adult really, 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 really wants something, they'll conveniently frame it as a right. I have a right to housing. I have a right to government-funded birth control. I have a right to marry. I have a right to choose. I have a right to parenthood. So just because an adult calls something a right, that does not make it a right. We actually don't have a whole lot of fundamental natural rights. And like the Incredibles would say, when everything becomes a right, nothing is a right.
Right.
And yet, those fundamental natural rights are so critical to not only the protection of the innocent, but overall national thriving.
Hey guys, real quick. I know a lot of you guys struggle with getting a consistent workout routine. So wherever you get to, whether that's the Globo gym or your home gym or even a parking lot somewhere, you get there and then you don't know what to do. You get there and you're just like, well, what in the world am I supposed to do today? And you just kind of meander around. And maybe you're trying to get ready for a mountain hunt in the fall, or you've got a mud race coming up, or you just want to be generally a strong and fit dude for normal everyday life, but you don't have a program that's tailored for you. I want you guys to stop wasting time at the gym or wherever you're working out and just settling for that same old routine that you've always done. It's time for you to get a guide that will help you reach your fitness goals. And that's why I want to introduce you to my friends over at Mountain Tough. Mountain Tough is a fitness and mental toughness app developed by military special operators and mountain hunters that's becoming a global movement for building mentally tough athletes on and off the mountain. So Mountain Tough is a native app ready to be downloaded on all platforms. So that includes iPhone, Android, Apple TV, and Roku. Once Once you sign up and download the app or access the website, you immediately have access to literally hundreds of exercise programs and thousands of workout videos. Thousands, okay? That includes structured hybrid strength and endurance programs, daily workouts, the full exercise library, mental toughness training, prehab and rehab, the Mountain Tough community and accountability, and a bunch of other stuff. And guys, you can use it all on the go, online or offline, no matter where you decide to train. Just getting started? No problem. They've got programs for beginners. Have minimal gear or no gear? All good. They have minimal gear and bodyweight programs. Wanting to get into or maintain elite level fitness like me? They've got you covered with programs for top tier athletes too. And guys, for a limited time, Mountain Tough is extending Undaunted Lifers like you an incredible offer. Go to mountaintough.com. That's MTNtough.com and enter the code Kyle when you sign up for a monthly plan to receive your first month free after your 14-day free trial. So for guys that aren't good at math, that is 6 weeks free to make sure this app is for you, and I'm sure it will be. That is 6 weeks free on the best-in-class physical and mental training app in the world. Stop wasting time. It's time to get real fitness results and let my friends at Mountain Tough guide the way. Again, go to MTN Tough. That's mountaintough.com, promo code Kyle. I think you're absolutely right, and we don't couch things and look at them properly, and you're right. The scripture's escaping me right now because I got like 17 things that I'm thinking of, but it's like, okay, we're going to call evil good, and we're going to go into bizarro world where the photo negative is what you're going to represent, but you're going to say it's truth. And it all goes back to the garden. Did God really say he made you male and female? Did God really say that you shouldn't have, homosexual relationships? Did God really say that you shouldn't step outside your marriage? All those different things. But let's go a little bit deeper on the rights talk, because you're absolutely spot on. It's whatever thing that I want that's kind of in my bag of goodies that I want, and also that I want for free. I'm just going to call it a human right. But in the book, you do delve deep into what a natural right is versus a legal right. And you make a distinction between those two categories because a lot of times natural rights and legal rights do get conflated, as you just talked about a little bit ago. So again, it's all in the book. So guys, go get them before us. It's in the show notes. Go check it out. The first couple of chapters are worth the price of admission, but you should certainly keep reading. Difference between natural rights and legal rights. Ready, set, go.
Okay. So I think it was Martin Luther King that said an unjust law is no law at all. Okay. So, and how do you know whether or not something is a just law? It is a law that aligns with natural law. Okay. And so natural law is a pretty robust system to understand the morality of what kind of laws we should be passing and which one. So just because we've passed something into law, that doesn't mean that it is a just law. That civil law does not make something a right or make something not a right. Natural law does. So we try to parse out, my co-author Stacey Manning and I, because we're both laypersons. We are not natural lawyers. We did have the foreword written by one of the most preeminent natural law scholars in the country, Robert George. But we kind of break it down. Like if you really want to figure out what is and is not a natural right, we have the 3 rules that make it a rights test, which we have found to be personally helpful. Number 1 is a natural right just exists. The government doesn't have to provide it for you.
Right.
And so like if you have the ability to open your mouth and speak, that's not something the government gives you. It's something that you have naturally. Your life, the government doesn't give you that. It's something that you have it naturally. Okay. So it exists outside of government. It existed before government existed. Okay. So that's number 1. When you look at a child's right to be known and loved by both people responsible for their existence, that is also pre-government. Nobody has to provide it for you. The second one is that everybody gets it in equal measure. Okay. So if how many life do you have, Kyle? How much life do you have?
I get the 1. Yep.
You get 1. I also have 1. Same with every other human on the planet. You get exactly 1. Equal distribution is a pretty good indicator that it's a natural right. How many parents do you have, Kyle?
I've got 2.
I also have 2. It does not matter that my parents divorced, that my father dated and remarried, that my mother repartnered with a woman. I do not have more than 2 parents. I have a mother and a father like everybody else. So if it can vary in degree or distribution, like a dorm room versus Mar-a-Lago, or a GED versus a PhD, it is not a natural right. It might be something that you need to live. Your survival might even depend on it, but it's not necessarily a natural right. So it existed pre-government. Everybody gets the same amount and nobody has to provide it for you. Okay. So if it has to be like poured the foundation, sheetrocked, painted, and, put a door and a lock on it. It's not a natural right. If it has to be dug up from the ground, bottled, shipped, labeled, and put on a shelf, it's not a natural right. Okay, nobody has to provide it for you. It simply exists. So those are the 3 rules that make it a rights test. And when you look at things through that lens, you see that a lot of the things that we call rights are actually commodities, or they're actually desires, or they're actually just longings packaged as natural rights. So I think it's really important to be very clear about what is and is not a natural right, and then you draw the hard line around protecting those rights.
Well, when you draw the line between natural and legal rights, and then you go back to the U.S. Constitution, to the framers of the Constitution, to the Bill of Rights, you're like, oh my goodness. So like when these people come up with this fantasy idea that we weren't founded as a Christian nation, it's like you just can't do that and keep your intellectual bona fides squared away, because these guys studied the Old Testament more than we did. They looked at these ancient texts, and yes, people like to bring up like Ben Franklin was a philanderer and Thomas Jefferson was a deist and he cut up the Bible and made his own Bible. Yes, but they also knew that this is the best way to do life, whether they believed in it or not, right? So all these other systems had been used, and they weren't good.
And just like our book, the one that we're referencing, the U.S. Constitution has no Bible verses in it. Like I didn't make a biblical appeal. I didn't make a scriptural appeal in our first book where we talk about the importance of children's natural rights to their mother and father. And the founders did not list, verses from Genesis, or, the creation mandate or anything like that. They did not list any of that. Both of these arguments are made on the basis of natural law. And the way to think about this is how you know what you ought to do and what is true by looking at the world of God. By looking at the world that he made, you can derive these fundamental universal truths. Now, interestingly, the world of God is never going to contradict the word of God. In fact, they are going to align with one another and reinforce one another. Why is that? Because the world of God and the word of God have the same author. And you can discover the same truths by going those 2 different pathways. But I would say the founders wisely chose to create a document based on natural law, because now you cannot reject it, even if somebody doesn't claim to be a Christian, or even if you're not a Protestant. You have a natural law system that is going to be true even for the Hindus that immigrate to the United States, and even for the people that say that they are atheists. So we made the decision, not just because it's right, but a tactical decision to say, I can make these arguments about children's need for a mother and father using Malachi chapter 2 and why God brought the 2 together as one, because he was seeking godly offspring. Or I can make this argument based on natural law, social science, the statistics, and the testimonies of children themselves who have been starved of their mother or father. And we went with the latter case because it is a case that you cannot reject if you do not recognize the special authority of Scripture as your highest level of law-giving information.
When there's so many anecdotes in the book, I mean, gosh, they're just absolutely heartbreaking. Like they just get hard to read. And sometimes for me, even my parents got divorced, and there's been, a lot of things that have happened because of that. And then I'm reading stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why I'm kind of insane.
Yes.
And you're just kind of reading it through because you're seeing it through someone else's lens. There's one quote before we start getting into the individual subjects. There was one quote from the book that for whatever reason just caught me askant. And I think it's because I was viewing it differently. But the quote is, thus, it's imperative for adults to order their lives around the rights of children. So one thing that I've been teaching people for a while is, okay, when the lawyer was trying to trip up Jesus in the Gospels and asked him, hey, what's the greatest of all laws? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it. He gave him another answer, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, well, if we look at the narrative of Scripture, who is my primary neighbor? My primary neighbor is Kelsey Thompson, my spouse, right? Whom, I am one flesh with and all the things, right? My secondary neighbor are my boys, James and Elijah, who I am to raise up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And I'm going to have to give an account someday for how I have shepherded and headed the household and the spiritual development of Kelsey, James, and Elijah. Tertiarily, my neighbors are everybody else and everything else. And so that was like front of brain. And then I read that and I was like, wait a minute. Like I've heard guys give advice, like he had a kid, Katie, you've seen this because you've obviously raised kids, but you have a kid, you and your spouse are talking and the kid's just like, Dad, hey dad, can you look? Hey dad. And my buddy, he turns to his kid and he says, look. If you and your mom were both drowning at the same time, not only would I jump in and save her first, I would take the time to dry her off before I worried about you. Now, people are like, oh my God, that's so mean. That's so... No, you're letting the kid know when you are launched as an arrow into the future as part of my progeny, it's still me and your mama. Right? So you do not get the full focus and attention. So help me kind of bring all these thoughts together, because I know you come at this from a biblical worldview.
Well, first, let me say that what we are talking about at Them Before Us is defending and prioritizing children's fundamental natural rights. Not everything children want, not everything that they demand. We are saying they have fundamental natural rights around which you must orient your life. That does not mean that there are no limits on screen time, or that if they identify as a furry, you go buy them a tail. That is not what we're saying. We are saying that children have concrete natural rights around which adults must conform, because the only alternative is for children to sacrifice their rights to conform to adult desires, and that is an injustice. That is why it's important to very clearly identify what is and is not a natural right for kids, because otherwise we get to the place where they are like little emperors, where everything that they say we do, to the detriment sometimes of our own relationship with our spouse. And I agree with you, that what children need most, and actually we open chapter 2 with this story, with this anecdote by a family therapist who had been in practice for nearly 50 years and a marriage researcher. And he said something to me that I've never forgotten. He said, a funny thing happens when they see their father loving their mother. They feel like their father is loving them. And when they see their mother loving their father, they feel like their mother is loving them. And he said, in my experience, in my 50 years of family therapy, it is the only instance in the pantheon of human experiences where you can be loved indirectly. Mom or dad isn't even looking at you. They're not touching you. They're not talking to you. And yet you are being loved by them because husband and wife are loving each other. And so you're right that there is, if we are honoring children's rights, we actually will prioritize. It requires that we prioritize our relationship with our spouse, not just hanging on by the skin of our teeth to our marriage, which sometimes you have to do for a year or two, but having a flourishing, loving, joyous, friendship-filled marriage like that meets the needs of your kids as well.
I saw this one. I wish I would have known the name of the show so I could give these guys a shout out, but it was a couple of Kiwis, a couple of guys from New Zealand that were talking. And this guy goes, hey, the best lesson my dad ever taught me? He just loved my mom. Mm-hmm. Gosh, he just loved my mom, and he prioritized her and he cared for her and he did all the things. Because everyone's expecting with that setup, Katy, well, he told me that no matter what, you just got to get through it. And no matter what, you have to protect those that can't protect themselves, or something that a dad is actually physically saying to his boy. No, he said, my dad modeled humility as he cared for my mom, which is going to help him. I think this guy is probably married, in how he loves his spouse. And if you want to take care of generational brokenness and all of that, it starts with you, brother, right? You can lament the fact that grandma or grandpa did this and great grandpa was a terrible guy and all those things, or you can stop it right now, which really does dovetail into something that y'all cover at the beginning of this book, which is fatherless homes and the negative impact that has on society. Because I'm not the first person to say it. I certainly won't be the last. I think just about every societal ill can go back to men that have abdicated their responsibility, men that were okay with siring children, but not fathering them. I want to read a quote from the book here. It appears when it comes to social crises, money isn't the problem and massive government spending isn't the solution. So what could be the explanation for failing students, swelling prison populations, and generational poverty? Could the 8-fold increase in fatherless children over the past 60 years be at the root of the problem? And Katy, the answer is clearly yes, because in every racial cohort except for Asian Americans, it has been an explosion. So 60 years ago, about 25% of black children were born to out-of-wedlock mothers. Now it's closer to 80%. For whites, it was 3%. Now it's over 30%. For Latinos, right now it's close to 50%. This isn't a literal epidemic. This is not like, oh, I'm going to use epidemic language because I need it to be hyperbolic so it seems worse than it is. It's way worse than we could even describe. So go and talk a little bit about that for us.
Well, this is exactly right. And in the book, we also go through things like the absolute correlation between high school dropouts and fatherless homes. I mean, you can see that the achievement gap in school is actually not racial. It is family structure related, because Black children who are raised by their married mother and father through high school graduation, especially if the parents attend church weekly, have no difference in terms of their achievement and
That's
their
right.
graduation rates. So this absolutely is not a racist school system. It's not a racist criminal justice system. It's not a racist welfare system. It turns out that, those representations of having disproportionate representation of Blacks in prison, or Blacks dropping out of school, or Blacks in gang affiliations, it has nothing to do with Blackness. It has everything to do with father loss. And unfortunately, our attempt to help the poor, struggling, especially minority women in the 1960s with the advent of the massive social welfare state actually reinforced and incentivized the very family loss and family breakdown that was leading to the poverty to begin with.
That's right.
And like you said, there's not just mountains of data on this, there's mountain ranges of data on this, that father absence is at the root of every major social ill that we are facing today. You cannot you give me an issue, homelessness, drug abuse, obesity, failing students, poverty, teen pregnancy. Like, there is no issue where you cannot drill down and say fatherless children are overrepresented in the groups of kids that are struggling with these issues. Suicide. I tell people, I'm like, don't give me this, I want social justice, until you first insist on justice for individual children in the home, because otherwise it is a Band-Aid over a gaping wound, and nobody is helped by that, especially not the child.
Well, and look, I've seen the data that points to the dad in the home could be terrible. He could be overweight. He could be slovenly. He could be lazy. He could be abusive. But the outcomes for the children just by having dad present, not even a good dad, right? And I'm not advocating being a jerk dad,
right?
But just having dad there is better than having dad not there. And a lot of it gets, and we're going to kind of go through the narrative of the book, so you might be tempted to jump around. But chapter 2 is called Biology Matters. And so, short quote, the only thing kids need to grow up healthy and happy are to be safe and loved. Essentially, any two will do is what we've been sold. Because I remember even in my Sunday school 5-6 years ago, somebody was like, look, can you actually say it's better for a kid to be an orphan than for them to be in a house with two loving gay dads? And a lot of people were really having trouble. Again, these are very well-meaning people. They're soft-hearted, but also soft-headed. And they just take these arguments and say, yeah, that seems to make a lot of sense. But just why is that any two will do mindset wrong? And why precisely does biology matter?
Well, I'm going to give you the overview of chapter 2 and chapter 3. We're going to hit these at the same time. Why does biology matter? Biology matters for 3 reasons. Number 1 is the one that you just touched on, because we actually want children to be safe and loved. And all of us know horrible exceptions to this. We know the fathers that abandoned or abused or neglected, and those men deserve condemnation. But I will tell you, there is no other family structure where you're going to get more highly connected men than a child's own biological father. And I very often will tell people, and we can do this right now, that while you're listening to Kyle and I talk, I want you to Google the words mother's boyfriend for me, okay? Google the words mother's boyfriend. Because if it's true that biology doesn't matter and kids just need to be safe and loved, and if the adults are happy, the kids will be happy, and any two will do, and all of that, then children living with their mother and her cohabiting boyfriend will be doing awesome, because they've got 2 parents, the adults are happy, they have a mother and a father figure, they maybe have more resources as a result. But what you just saw when you Googled mother's boyfriend is the most horrific, disturbing cases of child abuse and neglect and filicide that you're going to see anywhere on the internet. What we see is the predictor of childhood abuse is very often the presence of an unrelated man in the home. And sociologist Brad Wilcox will say that the most dangerous place a child in America can find themselves today is in the home of an unrelated man, specifically mother's boyfriend, left to care for the child themselves. So why does biology matter? It matters because if you actually believe that children deserve to be safe and loved, biology has seemed to build into us a system for that kind of protectiveness that we have not yet been able to replicate in any other arrangement, not even through adoptive parents who are going through intense screening and vetting and background checks and literally getting fingerprinted by the FBI. So far, we have not found a system of child safety that replicates the benefit of being raised by two biological married parents. So that's number one, why biology matters. Why else does biology matters? Number two is because there is something that only those two adults grant children that they crave, and that is their biological identity. It is very hard for children to answer the question, who am I? If they can't answer the question, whose am I?
Correct.
And maybe this doesn't make a lot of sense to you if you grew up with your mom and dad, or even if you grew up just knowing your mom and dad, but they were divorced. But if you grew up never knowing your father, there's a really good chance that through your adolescence and maybe even today, you're going, I don't even know who I am. I don't know. Yep. I'm trying to piece together an identity for myself as a lifter or as a husband or, proud of my Mexican American heritage. But there's probably something missing in you because you do not know where you get half of your features. You do not know why it is that you love music and nobody else in your family seems to care. It is because there is something that only those two adults who give us life can inform to us about the answer, who am I? So that is critical. And we've tried to minimize it a lot in this country, probably out of a protectiveness for our friends who have adopted. Yep. But even adoption has radically shifted to recognize the importance of a biological connection. In the 60s, when you just brought up all of the out of wedlock drop, the low rates before we had this high spike. Back then, almost all adoptions were closed adoptions. Kids didn't have any information about their first family. They didn't have contact with their birth mom. Today, do you want to guess? Well, you probably know because you read the book. How many adoptions are open adoptions today?
I forget the stat, but it's a shocking number. Like yeah. And for the reasons you're elucidating.
Yeah, it's 95%.
Yeah.
We have virtually no closed adoptions because social workers have recognized that even if children cannot be raised by their biological parents, they benefit from as many connections with their first family as possible.
Right. Even if it's aunts, uncles, cousins, yes. Like grandma, grandpa, just having some sort of familial grounding.
Yep, as much as possible. So number one, safe and loved. Number two, biological identity. And number three, if the child is raised by both biological parents, they will automatically get the perfect gender balance in the home. They will always, in 100% of cases, have a male parent and a female parent. And as you know, and your listeners probably have observed, men and women are different.
Shock of all shocks, breaking news.
And those differences really benefit kids. And we can get into that if you want. But the truth is that like with a male and a female parent, you get this perfectly well-rounded development in terms of fine motor skills, gross motor skills, in terms of empathy, but also adventure, in terms of like cognitive development, in terms of language use by the dad versus like immediate connection with language use for the mom. I mean, like you could not think of a better system to set kids up to grow and thrive in the world than having a male parent and a female parent. So that's it. Like if biology matters, which it does, there is nothing that can replace it. And that's a wrecking ball for all of these notions that we have that, I can just like be my true self and like come out, as a gay man and start this new family. Or no, it doesn't really matter if my boyfriend and I get married, like we can co-parent. It's fine if I want to create a child using a sperm donor because we're dealing with infertility. I'm sorry. Biology matters. It might matter the most other than protecting children's right to life. And if biology matters, that means very few adults are going to get what they want, but every child is going to get what they need.
And we're going to get way deeper into some of those things. But one of the things that you brought up, Katy, is the whose am I portion of that. Obviously, so I spoke at Lewisburg Prison a few years ago. One of the absolute pleasures of my life to be able to go there. That group of men had been basically forgotten. No one had come to speak to them or visit them in a really, really long time. And so there were two main things that I did. The very first thing that I did, when the guys were walking in, because they were not compelled to come, they could come on their own volition. I made sure to introduce myself to them and talk to them. And, I know what I'm doing. I'm shaking hands with murderers and rapists and pedophiles and all kinds of things. But the first words out of my mouth were, you guys have violated the laws of man, and that's why you're here, and you're going to have to stay here, and I get to leave and go home. But all of us in this room have violated the laws of God. So in that way, we are brothers. So can we dispense with this idea that somehow I'm different than you? So I started there, but then also I wanted to make this connection because I'm preaching the gospel hard to these guys. It's like, for a lot of you guys, you didn't know your dad, or your dad was a horrible, terrible, abusive man, and it's affected you deeply. And a lot of you, that's part of the reason why you are here, bad in your own decision making. Don't let that cloud your view of a perfect heavenly father. And so, because a lot of guys think like, wait, my dad was this horrible, terrible person. Now you're telling me to follow this like cosmic version of dad who's like bigger and stronger and all powerful and all knowing. Like, shoot, that sounds terrible. So I'm trying to delineate between those things for these guys. But as you move into chapter 3 of the book and we get into gender mattering, because yes, you talk about, of course, there are anecdotes where the birth mom and dad are awful, but the adoptive parents are great and all that. But those are statistical outliers when we're looking at the totality of these situations. But you talk about how we've equated, we've conflated equality with sameness.
Yes.
Okay, so men and women can be equal and have equal rights. Yes, 2 thumbs up, let's sign that, check. But they're not the same. Right. And that really does muddy the waters of this debate, because you talk about how in the book, dads reflect the world, moms reflect the home. That doesn't mean dad only goes out to the world and dad or mom only stays at home, but dads reflect the world around them and moms reflect what the tension level should be inside the home. And it should be a low conflict environment. And there are distinct and beautiful differences between a loving father and a loving mother. And so talk a little bit more about that, how we've kind of just equated, okay, yeah, equality, but no. They're just the same. Again, it kind of gets back to the any two will do argument.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, this is where the feminist movement went far off the rails, right? Because the first wave feminists believed that men and women are equal, so we need equal rights, for voting. And wouldn't it be great if women could have their own like bathrooms and things like that? So like a testament to how far the feminists have fallen in terms of now welcoming men into their private spaces. But the second wave of feminism really started to believe that if women are not exactly like men in terms of their career aspirations or their ability to walk away from sex without consequences, or, the high body count of the worst behaved men that they have the more stronger inclination for, that means that we're not really equal. And that is a big problem, because men and women are different. Biologically, in terms of their brains, in terms of their emotional orientations, even just in ocular difference, even just in terms of auditory differences. There's really important differences between men and women. All of them were down to the benefit of children. And so that was Stacy's brilliant framing. And women reflect the home. We tend to do activities with kids that have to do more with caretaking. We tend to care for kids. Dads reflect the world. They tend to play with kids, right? Women tend to emphasize equity and safety and emotional security. Dads push kids to take big risks. They actually push them to look at the world and conquer the world, even if the child is worried about it or scared. I mean, the world is wide open spaces. It's a lot more unpredictable. The home is very predictable. So you see moms who tend to be the ones who are packing the lunch, making sure the kids are eating their vegetables, brushing their teeth, going to the bed on time. When I go out of town and my husband is at home, it's T minus, 5, 4, 3, and I get pictures of them staying up late, binging on, Star Wars and
Let's
eating,
go.
Twizzlers or whatever. And it's that's great. There is that world of adventure where it's the boundaries are kind of in a different place. And then, mom comes home and they're like, God, please make us some broccoli. And it's great to have both. It's great to have that parent who's pushing them and doing adventurous, fun things. And then the predictable parent too. So unfortunately, we have told, especially women, that they're not really equal unless they act like men. They want the same thing. This is a really, really big problem right now in terms of women delaying childbearing, because they think that the way that they need to conduct their life is along the same route that men, when it comes to structuring their career, which is graduate, go to college, get a job, pay off debt, make partner at the law firm, and then maybe later you can stay home and have kids. But by that time, the woman might be 37 or 42, and her body is no longer going to cooperate with her. And a lot of times you find out when you're in your mid-40s that you have missed your opportunity to be a mother. Men have a much longer window when it comes to being a father, a little more flexibility in terms of their biological clock, a lot more flexibility. And so we have done women such a disservice by telling them that they're not really equal unless they are like men. But ultimately, at them before us, we would say the biggest victims are the children, who are now facing a cultural, legal, and technological landscape that have made mothers and fathers optional in the name of equality.
Right. And think about it. So I think Jordan said this quite a bit. He's like, men are not attracted to women that are corner office, sport car driving, Louis handbag carrying women. It's not to say that those women are unattractive. It's to say that men will marry down. I'm using these all as kind of generalizations.
Yep.
Men will marry down. Women will not marry up. And so when you have a feminist culture, more women getting college degrees, more boardrooms are forcing women into there so that they can keep their DEI scores up and different things like that. Not saying that these women are not impressive. That's not what I'm saying. But these women are like, well, I'm not finding any man that's up to my standards. And you see these man on the street interviews where they go up to these young women in their, teenage years and 20s. What are you looking for in a man? And they're always like, at least 6'4", body fat's got to be under 10%. He's got to make at least $250K a year. I'm not even going to consider dating him and all that. It's like, okay, well, when you dispense with that 0.001% of the population, who exactly are you going to date, madam? And it's just like we've been just in this milieu of first, second, third, and now fourth wave feminism. First wave feminism is let's have equality. Yeah, great. I'm okay with that. Second wave is like, hey, sexual liberation, like you do you, boo. Third generation is like, we actually technically don't need, third wave is like, we technically don't need men. We're essentially the same. And now fourth wave, it's men can become women. It's like, all right, this is the dumbest thing. We live in the dumbest time in human history. But then you get into these ideas because everyone loves to talk about toxic masculinity and not toxic femininity, right? You want to talk about misogyny, but what about misandry? What about hatred of men simply for the fact that they are men, right? Because of the presence of Y chromosomes and, male genitalia. But a quote from the book is the evidence tells us toxic masculinity is not a result of dad's influence. It's a result of dad's absence, which is exactly true because me preparing myself to defend image bearers of Christ around me or image bearers of God that are around me preparing to provide for my progeny in a way that allows them to extend their hands into their cultures and into their, communities and to protect women and children. People are like, oh, well, that's toxic. I held the door open for a woman one time and she looked at me and just rolled her eyes like, oh, like I couldn't have done that myself. It's like, that's not the point. That's not the point. Is I was taught to be chivalrous, and this is a minute example of chivalry. So talk a little bit more about this obsession with this toxic masculinity, whatever that is, even though they can't define it.
Well, I'll boil it down, and it is that boys and men are more aggressive and competitive than girls are. This is not a surprise to you or any of your listeners. Okay. Like this is why there's a lot more guys at jujitsu than there are women at jujitsu. Okay. Because men want that. And I know a killer jujitsu woman. I mean, like she is just an absolute beast, but men tend to gravitate towards these kinds of activities where there's more competitiveness and aggressiveness. And it's very, very important. What happens at jujitsu? You have rules. You have what do you call them? Do you have senseis? Is that what you call them? Forgive me.
They're professors, and there's written rules and there's unwritten rules. Like, hey, if it's a trial class guy, don't try to throw him into the next county, or else it's going to be your head next whenever you roll with the professor.
So you have these rules that govern how you use force. Okay. And that's what you're doing, right? Yes, you can do this move. No, you can't do this move. When they tap out, you stop. When they do this, you can just keep going. So actually, boys really need that as they grow. And you can look at this, and this does come down to raw physicality in some ways that we see that boys that do not. So, okay, gentlemen, let me ask you a question. Think about when you saw a baby being thrown up in the air. Okay. Everybody can think of that. Now, think about it.
Because I did it this morning. I did it this morning to see how high I could get them. Yep.
But did your wife do it?
Of course not.
Of course not. You can go to any country in the world, and what you will see is men throwing babies. And you can go to any country in the world, and you see women swaddling and wrapping their babies and strapping them to their bodies to be worn around for 6 hours a day. So like men naturally are more physical with their kids. They do this through tossing them in there when they're little, a lot of wrestling, a lot of running, jumping, climbing, swinging hammers. Like that is what I'm saying. Like men will develop children's gross motor skills in a way that women simply will not through the different ways that they interact with them. But especially the rough and tumble play is critical.
It's essential.
Boys, it's essential in learning how to control too much force. Oh, I can go harder here, right? Headlock, yes, with this, but not around, the place where it's going to like cut off the air circulation. Okay, I can really like grip them, but I can't bite them. And so like there is something about that channels boys' natural competitiveness and aggressiveness towards a world that will build civilization rather than destroy civilization. And so that is what we're talking about. You want toxic masculinity? You want people that are all about dominating and conquering regardless of the cost to others. That is a father absent child right there. That's what you're seeing.
When it's a problem of definitions, my definition of a toxic man is one that does not cultivate spiritual, mental, and physical resilience on a daily basis, one that does not provide spiritually and financially and from a protective mechanism for their families, that doesn't leave an inheritance, right? So basically everything you're supposed to do biblically, the opposite of that. That's what a toxically masculine man is. Yeah. But according to culture, according to this left-wing feminist culture, I got news for him. James and Elijah are going to be two of the most toxically masculine boys you will ever see in your entire life, because you know what their favorite game to play with dad is? It's not baseball. It's not race cars. It's Fight Club. That's basically their favorite thing to do. They call it bad guys, right? Because what I used to do is I would get on the couch and I would make this mean face and they're like, Dad, you're a bad guy. And I'm like, yeah, what do we do to bad guys? And then they would just run as fast as they could. And they know the rules. You can hit Dad, just not in his face, not his genitalia, but otherwise you can kick and hit Dad as hard as you want. But guess what? I'm going to give it back to you. I'm going to give it back to you a little bit. And again, they're 4-3, right? About to be 5-3. Yeah. So I'm not blasting them with Muay Thai kicks, but I'm letting them feel it, right? But it's a fun thing. And I mean, they will just go for over an hour and they're just jumping off things, landing on me. But that's what they need, and because every now and
they're so satisfied, and they're so confident, and they're so at peace, and they're so connected. And do you let them run at and jujitsu kick your wife?
Never even close. And if they even lift a hand, I'm going to tell you this. I don't know that I've ever said this on my show. It's one of the biggest regrets that I've had in my life recently, and it was such a small thing. But I'm at my chiropractor's office, and this is one of those kind of pinnacle doctors, so they just get you in and out. So you're not in the place for very long. And there's like probably a 7 or 8 year old little boy. His mom tells him to do something, right, in the soft parenting approach. And he kind of raises his hand to her like he was going to hit her. And I saw this and I was aghast. I wanted to snatch this kid up and just put him up against the wall, but I didn't say anything. And I wish I could go back and not snatch him up and put him against the wall, but to get down on his level and get in his face and be like, excuse me, young man, you do not ever raise your hand to a woman like that with the threat of violence. Do you understand me? Regardless of what mom does, because mom would have probably tried to come in and protect her boy and like, oh, he didn't mean it. It's like, no, brother, we mean it. Like, I remember me and this group of guys, there was this kid, he was kind of the knucklehead of the group. He's in his early 20s or whatever. And this is when he was a teenager. He was still in high school. He would always call his mom by her first name. But we didn't know that. But we're all in the kitchen hanging out and his mom walks in and he calls her by her first name. And all of us, we like surround this kid. And I was like the small guy in the group. We had these 3 brothers that were enormous. And we basically surround this kid and we're like, dude, if you ever do that to us or do that to her in our presence again, we're going to smash you in front of your mom. Do you understand me? She is mom or ma'am. Those are her 2 name options. You got me?
Let me ask you this. Why is it that so many of the kids in that prison were fatherless? Those men as children, why were they fatherless?
Not by any decision that they made, but the dads were.
It's because when a kid raises their fist to their mom, right, when they're 7, or when they speak disrespectfully to mom when they're 13, mom does not necessarily have the wiring, the will, or the strength to challenge the kid.
Correct.
And so very often, the first time that one of those kids will have a check on their aggression is the cops. That will be the child's first taste of real consequences from misusing their physicality. And that is why you see a direct correlation, unfortunately, with fatherlessness and high levels of criminality, because they didn't have a dad saying, don't you talk to your wife that, don't you talk to my wife that way. No, you are not allowed to bite your brother or sister. Just because you're angry, that doesn't mean you can shatter the window. Like, here's the way that you need to deal with your anger. You can punch your pillow, or you can go for a run, or you can just tell me about it or whatever. So it's like, I'm sorry, but like, there's no hope for us, in terms of mitigating and channeling men's aggressive tendencies, which is civilizational building necessity. Men are going to build civilization in ways that women will never. They're going to protect society in ways that women will never. But you won't get it without dads.
That's right. And just as a quick aside, and I know you'll co-sign this, and then we need to move on. I know individually some single moms that listen to this show. Specifically, one of the most, it gets me like, upset every time I think about it, upset in a good way. But I was told that there was a single mom who apparently had a horrible husband and, a neglected young boy. And apparently this guy's not in the picture anymore. And it's kind of a thank God situation. This guy's not in the picture anymore because of how terrible he was. But I was informed that this single mom, she will listen to my show on Sundays when it's me and three other guys doing Bible study. And when Pastor Joe B. Martin of Church 1122 in Florida, we do a segment every month called Ask a Pastor. And it's him and I just kind of going back and forth, but I'm bringing in questions that I've heard from other people or from our donors or from my circle of guys here. And she's like, because this is the only positive male feedback that he gets is when we listen to y'all in the car. And so the next time I went and traveled to the church in Jacksonville, I was like, make sure that I meet this mom and this little boy just so I could encourage mom for 5 seconds and get down on the boy's level and just talk to him and show him, hey, I'm the guy from the show. And there are guys like us out there. And for you single moms, just know that you feel like you have to play both roles right now, but you really don't have to. Okay. And I know circumstances may have befallen you, or perhaps your own bad decisions have led to your current level of circumstances. However, your kids need a mom. They don't need half of a mom and a pseudo half dad that you're not even wired to be. So that would just be my encouragement to you gals. Do you have anything on that before we move on? You want to put a stamp on it?
So many things, but you're exactly right. There are single moms who are single moms because they were the only parent willing to act like an adult. Okay. And obviously the dad in this situation put us before them. He's like, me first, not my wife, not my kid. Okay. I wish that we had the kinds of cultural and legal punishments for that kind of like covenant breaking behavior, but we don't. Thanks, to no fault divorce largely. And then all of this sort of like, if the adults are happy, kids will be happy kind of hogwash. But what I will say is, we talk about this in our second book too, Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City, that you become what you behold. Okay. Right. So let's be really honest that kids that grow up with a single mother are more likely to become single parents themselves because you will become what you behold. So what is the job of parents who are in a situation that is not ideal and who recognize it? They must give their children something else to behold. They need to say, you can't look at your father's decision as something to pattern your life after, but you can look at grandma and grandpa who have been so faithful to one another. Or I'm going to get you hooked on watching Charlie Kirk, okay? Because like he's got some pretty great political answers. He got some pretty great moral advice as well. And you can watch him like evolving as a husband and father too. So like ideally, children will be able to become what they behold in their own home. A healthy mother who loves her femininity and is super dialed in and supportive of her husband. A father who is like the primary discipler in his house and who uses his physical strength, his emotional strength, and his spiritual strength, not just for the benefit of his family, but for the benefit of the world. Okay, that's ideally what's going to happen. That is how to set your children up for flourishing. But if you don't want your children to become what they've beheld in their own home, you have got to redirect their gaze towards people that they can behold, that they can become. And my husband and I both came from broken homes. And the family that took him in, that he decided to become like, they did this, right? They became, he literally said as a 7-year-old, when he went to his best friend's house and he looked around, he's like, this is nuts. This family, they all live together in the same house. The kids stay here every day. The kids don't go somewhere else on the weekend. And he goes, not only that, but the parents don't fight and scream. In fact, I saw them kissing each other in the kitchen when nobody was looking. And he, as a 7-year-old, he said, when I grow up, my house will not be like my house. My house is going to be like Chad's house. And Chad's parents gave him something to behold, and that is who he has become. And Chad's father said on our wedding day, the best gift that you will give your children is to love their mother. The exact same thing that you said. So to the single moms or the single dads out there who are in a terrible spot, like you said, maybe their own decisions, maybe out of no fault of their own, you've got to direct your children's vision to the kind of people you want them to become.
It's so funny you use the example that you use because I literally wrote this down. I remember being, I couldn't have been older than 10 years old. And I went over to a buddy's house and, my parents were divorced and this was when they were still together, but probably, I guess, should have been divorced. We're going to get to that in just a second. But I remember seeing, we were sitting at the dinner table, eating dinner or whatever, and the mom's, getting everything ready. And dad walks in from work And the first thing he does is he walks up and hugs and kisses his wife. I was like, I like looked at my buddy thinking like, oh, we're about to have a moment because that was weird. That's, oh, gross. That was weird. And he just kept eating. And I was like, wait, that's like a thing? That's like a normal thing? Because that wasn't modeled for me. And look, I love my dad and I love my mom, and I got most of my moral foundation from them, even if it was on accident. But it's like, gosh, that's just a different thing. And this really dovetails into chapter 4 of the book, which is called Marriage Matters. But then you kind of have the photo negative of that in chapter 5, which is where you talk about divorce, because statistically speaking, and I don't care if you look at this anthropologically, sociologically, biblically, whatever, the home setup that leads to the most positive outcomes for children is biological father married to biological mother in a low conflict setting where everybody goes to church.
That's
Boom.
exactly right.
Doesn't matter what theology you have. Doesn't matter if you're a 5-point Calvinist or you're one of those, people that are waving wands and all kinds of crap during the worship service. Like, it doesn't matter if you have all those boxes checked. But I do want to read this quick quote about divorce here from the book. Divorce is another term for the death of a family. The end of a marriage is often the death of a child's feelings of safety and security. It's the end of one home, the end of love shared by two people a child loves most, and the end of time spent with both parents daily. Divorce introduces instability, confusion, questions of loyalty into the already complex nature of childhood. So hard for me to even read that out loud, considering, my own family's divorce or my parents' divorce and what that looks like. But I forget who said it, but they're like, in modernity, women will give up their marriage for their happiness, and men will give up their happiness for their marriage. And so being in the men's space, I've been just flooded with some of the worst, most heartbreaking stories of men who did the right thing. They worked their butts off. They took care of mom and the kids. They did everything. But mom just bought into he's just not enough for me. Right. He's not doing things my way, and I'm better. And I look at the mirror every morning because Joel Osteen told me to say these affirmations in the mirror. And by golly, that's what I'm going to do. I am enough. I am all this. And then they blow up their entire lives because they bought the satanic feminist lie of that they needed more, that this isn't enough, and certainly he isn't enough. But my goodness, even to men out there that are considering divorce because they're not quote unquote happy, it's like, brother, who gave you the idea that is your utmost responsibility on this planet to be happy? Because your supposed heroes from the Bible, do you think they were happy? You think Paul was happy when he was getting snake bit, stoned, shipwrecked, like betrayed by his friends? I'm sure there wasn't a whole lot of happy, but it was about his duty to God, not his current level of happiness in his circumstances. So let's pull off the Band-Aid. Let's talk about divorce.
Well, I would say that the culprit here is not primarily Joel Osteen. It is that there is an entire stream of influencers on Instagram that are empowering and encouraging women to leave husbands that are not abusive and not neglectful and not addicted to porn, because they need to live their best lives and be their true self. And mother's happiness is the most important component when it comes to child well-being, and all of this garbage and lies. And it feeds into a few major problems that women have. Number one, we are more susceptible to social contagion. We are more responsive to what's happening in the environment around. We pattern ourselves, we mimic, we meme, we're mimetic more in that sense, in terms of responding to what's happening in the world around us. This is why you see young girls much more likely to now adopt a transgender identity, because they're more susceptible to the social contagion. If a friend or two decides to transition, they will suddenly be like, well, I should do that too. Sometimes it's a misplaced empathy, but a lot of it is just that we are more susceptible to what's happening in the cultural around us. And now what you have, this happens in the real life world too. So if you have a friend, if you're a married couple and you have one close friend who divorces, your likelihood of divorce goes up by 75%.
Yeah, it's like a disease.
We're so susceptible to what is happening in our world. And now you have these Instagram trends where you can get endless streams of beautiful 30-something fit women who are like, I just love my husband. It was the best thing. And then, oh, here's a kiss from my new guy who's so hot and fit and whatever. And you know what's kind of nice, because obviously I still want time with my kids, but I also get 3 days of me time now. But of course, they are generally milking their husbands. They're for money. And so he just gets the raw end of the deal. And I am very familiar with the statistics. It is 69% of divorces are initiated by women. So I know the divorces that have been initiated by men. And And those are, they were awful. And she was doing everything that she could. But generally, women tend to have higher demands in the relationship. I was just talking to a group of people last night, and 2 nights ago, and I said, men have lower expectations for marriage than women do. They want food, they want sex, and they want her to be nice to him. That is what men want. Okay.
Yeah.
Women want the exact kind of romance that they want in the way they want it on the day that they want it. They want to go to the restaurant that they want to go to. They don't just want him to be nice. They want him to be protective, and they want him to take care of all of the security for the house and do the yard work and all of this. And so we just see that women do have higher demands for their emotional connection, especially in the relationship, than men do. And this is actually why we need to abolish no-fault divorce, because it means that you can get out of the relationship even if the other person is not at fault. And there are plenty of misbehaving men out there who are addictive, abusive, abandoned, and they need consequences. But when it comes to the no-fault situations, women are more likely to initiate those. And then men, like you said, who have really done everything that they can. And by the way, over the last 20 years, men, because, all of these Instagram reels are like, he doesn't do enough housework. I'm still working full time, and I'm also taking care of the kids. Men, even though they tend to work more hours, they tend to do more overtime, they tend to do more dangerous jobs than women. They are now on average doing an hour more of housework and childcare than they did 20 years ago. So men are doing more than they used to, and women generally still are unhappy with that. So the solution is we have got to, in essence, penalize people for breaking the marital covenant. We need to do that judicially. You should not get 50% of the kids in the home if you are the one that is breaking the covenant. And we need to do that socially. We need to actually stigmatize people who walk away from their marriage when there is no reason to walk away. So we have an entire chapter on divorce. It is something that has not gotten the attention that it deserves. It is responsible for a disproportionate amount of family breakdown and alienation of men from the marriage marketplace overall. And obviously, it has been devastating to kids.
Yeah. I mean, you go back to Reagan, and you mentioned this in the book. Reagan looks back at his entire political career, and he says one of, if not the biggest problem, was when he brought no-fault divorce to the state of California when he was governor. Mm-hmm. And because, again, no-fault divorce means hey, the person that's at fault for the marriage falling apart, whether it's infidelity or some sort of abuse, because there are women who beat their husbands physically, they get 100% custody of the kids. Yep. So his dad can see the kids 4 days a month and, odd-numbered Thanksgivings or something like that. And she gets child support and she gets alimony. Right. And she's just an awful, awful, terrible person. And I look at it this way. There's this guy, I forget his name, but he's like this cowboy wisdom guy on YouTube. He's got blue eyes, big beard. He always wears a cowboy hat. And he just kind of gives these all shucksy, wisdom quotes and things like that. And he was just talking about people don't really understand the mental burden that men are under.
Yes. Even
if they're not good men. But yeah, if you look at it she did this many hours of housework, he did this many hours, she worked this job and made this amount of money. It's no. The burden that a man walks around with, that's why it's hard for men to fall asleep at night. Because it's what have I not done? Who have I not served? Because no matter what, someone's disappointed. Because I look at it this way. So there's a lovely gal in our Sunday school. Jake Winkler is one of our forging tablers here, so he does a lot with us. But Lady Winkler, I call them all ladies. So Lady Winkler, she said, yeah, women are just never satisfied. Because let's say you've got the man that is crushing it. He's got a business, he's in shape, everyone's looking to him, makes tons of money. What's the complaint? You're not home enough. You don't give me enough attention. You don't give the kids enough attention and all these types of things. So there's a complaint. Then you have the guys that are home. They're seeking the children. They're taking the wives on date and all that. But let's say he's not really good at work, right? He keeps getting passed over for promotions because he's a little bit, more beta in his disposition. He's not closing the deals. He's not hitting his sales quotas. What does she complain about? Gosh, I don't know where the mortgage payment's going to come from. Honey, are you going to do something about this? We haven't been on vacation in 2 years because we can't afford it. Are you going to do something about this? So it's no matter what, either your wife is disappointed, your kids are disappointed, your boss is disappointed, your friends are disappointed. Dude, you don't come out with us anymore. I don't remember the last time you came in and worked out with us or went and saw a ball game with us. Someone's going to be let down. And so that's part of the problem is the mental weight and burden that is on men is substantial, but we were built for it, guys. That's not me giving you an excuse. We were built for that level of burden.
You're your best when you're shouldering a heavy load. And I will say, there is advantages to having a wife who has high expectations. So
Sure.
marriage, gentlemen, even though there are a lot of problems with modern marriage, specifically, I would say the incentives around divorce, and that should lead you to incredible caution around who you marry. But you should get married. You should get married because there's no other pathway that statistically is going to lead to the same level of your flourishing. Married men have higher rates of happiness than single men. They obviously have more sex and better sex, especially if you're a religious man, than a single guy. You are going to make more in your job. You're going to achieve more. You're going to build more wealth. Like, there's a lot of trash talk about marriage, and a lot of it is deserved, but don't think that there's another way to do this, that shacking up is going to get you this, or co-parenting with, somebody, or creating some kind of like, arrangement where you're going to have a child on purpose but not be married, or you're never going to commit to the woman that you're with, or you're going to live a life as a bachelor forever. I mean, sorry, but maybe a few people are going to succeed like that. But overall, marriage is still the best plan for men. I would just say be very judicious about who you marry and go to church. Like, we don't have the same kind of legal scaffolding that is going to enforce these vows. So all you have, the best we have, is going to be a communal scaffolding and an internal scaffolding to say marriage is right and good. Our vows actually mean something, and we are going to walk behind people that have done it well and pattern ourselves after them.
Well, I don't want to veer too far out into right field because we're kind of closing up on time, and there's still a couple of still incendiary topics I want to get to. But you have these modern, men and women that were basically catechized by Disney movies about Prince Charming and the princess, and I mean, not modern movies, which is basically women should be lesbians, and that's modern Disney. But it's like back in the day, you needed those relationships, and you sought that out. But then you look at the divorce rates amongst arranged marriages, and I know we're not in an arranged marriage culture, versus people that just can kind of willy-nilly pick and find the person that they love. Look at the arranged marriages. They almost never get divorced. Why? Because they're dedicated to the process of marriage and keeping a marriage together, and they know that love develops over time. So you're lusting after your girlfriend because she's a smoke show, and you're like, I'm gonna put a ring on it because I want this to be like this for forever. It's like, brother, gravity's undefeated. It's like eventually some of those things are not going to be the way they look and feel right now. And so if that is the basis of your relationship is, well, she's super hot, huh? Like, that's not going to be good for you in the long term. Are you dedicated to wedding, or are you dedicated to marriage? But in chapter 6, Katy, you get into talking about same-sex parents. We did touch on this a little bit earlier, but I want to read a quote here because there's studies that supposedly prove that any two will do, and then the studies are absolutely bunk. But here's this quote here. The problem with gay parenting isn't the gay parents. It's the missing parent. Children raised in same-sex homes will always be missing one adult to whom they have a natural right. Biology is a bigot when it comes to parenthood. It insists on a mother and a father. So again, this gets back to what I was saying earlier about, even Catholic organizations, orphanages, trying to find same-sex couples, two females or two males, or even polyamorous relationships, and just place these kids in a home. Hey, this is a loving home. Look, dad and dad, they both make a ton of money. And so this is going to be, basically cover up, a bevy of issues because they have money to pay for babysitters or some such. But it becomes problematic when you look at the actual society. And so, like, people want to talk about Obergefell, and they want to talk about all those things, but it's like God gave us male and female and told us, be fruitful and multiply. Yeah. Create progeny, right? Spread your tentacles out, shoot those arrows into the next generation, those types of things. And that is the setup that we need and require. And when we bastardize that and we call it marriage, two men, it's not gay marriage. It's a gay bonding that they can get a marriage certificate for. But in the eyes of God who created it, it's not a real thing. But for society, it's almost like after Obergefell, the ship just sailed. Christians and conservatives are like, I don't want to bring that up anymore. That's the third rail of politics. You got Ted Cruz being asked about it whenever he was running for president in 2016. And he's just like, we're just going to go with what the laws in the states say. And why are we all so scared to say, like, no, kids deserve a mother and a father. And it is altogether unhealthy when children are raised in a situation that isn't that. So why can't we just say that now?
Yeah, well, because we're so focused on the adults, whether it is what the gay adults want or how hard it would be for our social acceptance and who we, might be excluded from if we were to say kids need mothers and fathers. And marriage actually is the tool that all of society throughout history and every culture and every religion has used to give it to them. That marriage ultimately is not about adult feeling. It's not a vehicle of adult fulfillment. It is an institution of justice for children. That is what marriage is. And you're exactly right that very few people are willing to, they don't have the balls. They don't have the balls because the social cost is high. Maybe even the job cost is high. Maybe you're not allowed to say that at work. Like, that's very real in a lot of different workplaces. And yet it's never going to not be true for kids. Like, no amount of saying love makes a family, no 5 Supreme Court justices, no amount of passing a law, no amount of tinkering with children in a laboratory to try to create a baby that can go to 2 men or to 2 women is ever going to change the reality that children come from a man and woman. They benefit from that man and woman. They get their biological identity from that man and woman. They're most likely to be safe and loved when they're raised by that man and woman. You will not overwrite the reality, the gravitational laws of who children are. We will just suppress it for a long time and victimize kids in the process.
I think you're absolutely right. And again, the mind shift, if you get nothing else from this conversation, which if you've gotten nothing so far, what are you still doing here? Move on and go listen to your feminism podcast. Go eat your vegan hamburger. But like at this point, just shifting the mindset and being like, how does this affect the children? So you've got biblical grounds to divorce your spouse, right? Death, adultery, abandonment, right? You feel like your husband's abandoned your marriage or your wife's abandoned your marriage, and you're thinking about your happiness and all the things you could do if you were given the reset button, but you have children. And then you think about it from their perspective and you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to do the thing that's harder, right? So that's what I've told some of these guys that have been absolutely screwed by these women in their lives. Well, everything except screwed, I guess is one way to say it. Right. But they've done these things, and I'm like, brother, I'm not saying this is justified. I'm not even saying it's good, and I'm definitely saying it ain't going to be any fun. But that's what you're going to do. You're going to do what it takes, because I've heard from a lot of well-meaning counselors, because I got some counselors I know that are good buddies, and I've heard all the different, things, and I've read the Gary Thomas books and all that, but they're just like, staying together for the kids is not a good long-term solution. I'm like, it is for the kids. When you think about it from their perspective, because again, what did I say earlier about arranged marriages? Sometimes you realize, oh, if I practice this whole loving my wife thing, if I practice this whole loving my husband thing, if I practice this whole I'm going to be a helpmate fit for him and I'm going to love her as Christ loved the church, it's crazy, Katy. Breaking news, second breaking news on the show. It starts to work. It starts to work. It's like we start actually embracing the roles that were given to us by God before time in memoriam, and it starts to actually work out. But we've done all this. We've gone into all these different subject matters, but now we need to weave into the subject matter that has, I guess, been the most controversial, because I told you off air, I have some very controversial takes, like, hey, let's not, murder babies when they're residing in their mother's wombs. That's bad. Hey, little girls can't turn into little boys no matter how much surgical intervention you do. That's bad. I've even gone out on a limb, and this has gotten me a lot of hate mail. I don't think pit bulls should be able to be owned because they're essentially wild animals. I personally like them. If I was a single guy without nieces and nephews or kids, I would have a pit bull because they're athletic and cool. But you know what? Pit bulls aren't mauling 38-year-old in shape guys to death. They're mauling elderly women and little babies to death. Okay. So I don't think pit bulls should be owned. All right. That's terrible. But whenever I came out and started talking about IVF, holy Moses. And Katy, I had people that just looked at the episode of my show, which was Christians should not use IVF. That was the name of the episode. And people would not listen to the episode. I talked for 45 minutes on the subject, but I have lost friends. I almost lost sponsors over it. I have some very strategic and powerful and good partnerships that were called into question because I started saying these things out loud, because I was ignorant on the IVF process and what was actually going on and the moral implications therein. But, the people that do the 40 Days for Life, their book kind of helped me. Wait a minute, I thought this was just a morally neutral thing. And then I hear Lila Rose of Live Action talking about it. Then I hear the great Al Mohler talk about it. I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I should pause, dig deep, really get a philosophy here. And I was just shocked by what I found out about the process because, and you talk about this in the book, and we can't go into all the detail, guys, go pick up the book. It's in the show notes. The sheer number of human beings that are killed in the process of IVF, the commodification of wombs, sperm, eggs, the problem with eugenics and designer babies. Like, oh, I want a donor or a surrogate that was like athletic and has blue eyes and tan skin. There's no such thing as a donor really,
Right.
because a lot of these people are profiting off the process. Gay men always seeming to adopt or to make out of thin air male babies. And we're not supposed to question why they keep doing that and why it's overwhelmingly male. Even in the book, he talked about genealogical bewilderment. But I do want to read a couple of quotes from the book, and then this is where we'll end our discussion today, because IVF and surrogacy, my goodness, people have fervently, like, very aggressive opinions on it, but they don't know jack about it. So let me read these quotes here. If big fertility's transgressions against children were on parade, it would prove impossible to pick the most appalling float. Undesirable embryos are routinely discarded before they can even catch a glimpse of life womb side, while those lucky enough to get a shot at life in utero will face the gauntlet of selective reduction. Selective reduction is science speak for abortion between 12 and 20 weeks. Surplus embryos trapped, frozen in suspended animation are eventually thawed and discarded, donated to research, or put up for embryo adoption. For an industry in service to making new life, it sure does an awful lot of taking new life. And then a little bit later in a subsequent section of the book, surrogacy comes in two forms. Traditional surrogacy, in which the mother is impregnated with her own genetic child, and gestational surrogacy, in which the mother is impregnated with donor eggs. Surrogacy segments what nature intends to be one woman, genetic mother, birth mother, and social mother, into three separate and, in effect, optional women. And so this is going to be the section that if you come in with preconceived notions about, hey, surrogacy, 2 thumbs up, IVF, 2 thumbs up, and even, Katy, my personal family, I have a niece and a nephew because of the process of IVF, okay? But this was before I looked into it. Now I'm like, how many other nieces and nephews do I have that are in frozen arrested development that'll never see the light of day? And so there's not really a question in there, Katy. I just really needed to establish what we're about to jump into, because, guys, this is very, very important, and you need to accept some things that might be hard to swallow. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Kyle is right. Kyle is right. All of you guys who are like, I don't know about this, or all of the donors, or all of the different partners, if you're like, I don't like that he's talking about IVF, Kyle is right. You are wrong. And I'm sorry, but there is no statistical way to say this otherwise. Now, the reason why you are feeling a little bit threatened right now is because we have now finally touched on a subject that interferes and intersects with something that you want. You were fine when we were talking about how all of these women are initiating divorces against men, and that's such an injustice. And you were okay when we were talking about how same-sex parents are going to deny something that children need. But now we're in a realm where, like, wait a second, now you're talking about me and my people. Yes, we are. Because in the world of putting children first, no adult group gets a pass. In the world of children's rights, all adults, single, married, gay, straight, fertile, and infertile, have to do hard things on behalf of children, because the only alternative is for children to do hard things for you. And that is an injustice. Certainly, that's an injustice if you consider yourself to be somebody that is following the God of Scripture, the God of Scripture that always said it is the strong who sacrifice for the weak and never the other way around. If you believe that life begins at conception, you actually have a greater enemy in big fertility than you do in Planned Parenthood. We don't exactly have the numbers on the little lives that are victimized every year by fertility clinics, because they're not required to track or share what they do with these little lives. But It's a safe estimate that it could be 4 times the number of children are killed through the process of IVF as are killed through the process of abortion every year. We love the niece and nephew that was born through IVF. We just wish that all of their siblings could have been born as well. The best estimate that we have is that only 3 to 7% of lab-made babies are going to be born alive. The vast majority are going to be graded out of, they literally grade children. They grade them, A, B, C, D, E, A, B, C, D, and then they'll say, we're going to chuck the C and D grade embryos. We're going to keep the A and B embryos. We're going to plant a couple of the A ones. We're going to freeze some of the surplus. And then before you even get to the point where you're implanting and freezing, you're genetically screening Oh, it looks like this baby might have some kind of genetic, they're going to be donated to research. Oh boy, we've got 8 kids, 2 girls and 6 boys. We don't need that many boys. We're going to donate 4 of those boys to research. When you are sidewalk counseling somebody that is considering abortion, you're typically got one life on the line.
Correct.
One life that you're trying to save. But when Paris Hilton goes in to get her IVF babies made, she has 20 of them. Unfortunately for those 20, they were all boys, but Paris wanted a girl. What do you think is going to happen to those 20 boys? So this is a eugenics process. This is not primarily about babies. We love the babies that are born alive. The truth is the vast majority never will be. And it's not because they went through a process where they just naturally aborted in the mother's body. You know, it wasn't meant to be. They didn't implant. It is because some technician decides who lives and who dies. And what's happening in big fertility is a mass scale of child victimization. So this makes you uncomfortable. Welcome to the world of children's rights. This is a place where we protect kids, even if it runs up against our own self-interest.
Well, Katy, it makes me uncomfortable because again, I've lost friends that were in my wedding because of the title of a podcast, which means they're ignorant doofuses or doofi. I don't know what the plural of doofus is. I need to figure that out. This is the second time I've said that on the show. But people that are not intellectually honest, that don't want to actually engage with the content, because this is what I've always told people. If I've said something that is inaccurate, right? So whether I'm talking about a news story or I'm quoting someone and it's inaccurate, please let me know. I'm always fine to follow my sword and correct the record when I've said something incorrectly. But if you don't like the way I said something because of my tone or because of your political or philosophical priors, that's a you problem, okay? And the thing about this is this goes back to when you were doing your little chicken blog, right, back in the day. Yep. This goes back to we don't want to be seen as bigoted and judgmental. Yep. When the Bible, when Jesus talks about, judge not lest ye be judged, he's talking about not judging from a place of piety, not judging from a place of self-righteousness to avoid hypocritical judgment. But then we see throughout Scripture with Jesus' words and the words from Paul, we are to judge people. But we are to judge them appropriately, because who else is going to judge them this side of the great white throne judgment? And so that is something that I think a lot of people need to understand. This doesn't mean that you go into your buddy's house because they're going through the IVF process and you like just castigate them and like call them these terrible, horrible murderers. The thing is most of them don't know what they're doing. I don't buy the nonsense now in the pro-life or pro-abortion debate, which is that these women don't know what they're doing. Yes, they do. They've been convinced that it's just a clump of cells, which is why, Planned Parenthood and all these places, they don't want to show you ultrasounds and they don't want to do all that because you'll see the beating heart of an actual baby in there, right? And then you won't want to kill your own progeny. But that's the thing that most people are not reckoning with. This is a difficult thing, yes, but it's also a necessary thing. It's the same thing whenever I train people on how to respond to pro-abortion arguments, because now they run to it. But what if she's raped is always the thing. Yep. And I say, I agree with you that we should punish the rapist. Right. But I don't agree with you that we should give the death penalty to the child. Because guess what? If my dad goes into a liquor store, robs them, and then shoots the clerk on the way out, I don't get the death penalty for that, right? That's something my dad did, right? And so it's just one of those things that, well, I guess we can just end here, Katy, with all of the things we've talked about today. Like these are third rails on a lot of people's lives and relationships, and they just don't want to go anywhere near this. And they may, quietly listen to some Jordan Peterson podcasts or Ben Shapiro or Charlie Kirk and me, and they're trying to figure out how they can have these arguments in their life. But then when it comes time to actually push back the darkness, they're too cowardly to do it. What would you say to those people?
Okay. If you're a Christian, this is your job. There has never been a culture where Christians have not gone into it, where the lives and the well-being of children have not improved. And every culture has some distinct kind of novel way of victimizing kids. The Christian missionaries that went to China had to combat foot binding. And Amy Carmichael, when she went to India, had to combat ritualistic child prostitution in their temples. And everywhere that Christians have gone, literacy rates have gone up and abortion rates have gone down. And we Christians in the first century eradicated the widespread practice of Roman exposure of infants. Well, guess what? we also have distinct ways that we are victimizing children. And I think that we're pretty familiar with abortion. Obviously, we're against things like child abuse. We all hate child trafficking, which, by the way, is connected to surrogacy. And you can Google Katy Faust surrogacy and find out more about that. But one of the novel ways that our culture is victimizing children is through reproductive technologies, right at the earliest moments of their life. And so this is the kind of thing where don't venerate all of the Christians of the past and how they civilized the world through these ideas about Imago Dei that dignified women and children and the most vulnerable. Don't do that unless you're also willing to confront the cultural issues, the cultural threats to the most vulnerable today. And part of that is IVF and surrogacy and sperm and egg donation. We have 2 chapters on this in our book with dozens of testimonies of kids who had to be created this way and the impact that it had on their identity, on their sense of self, on their well-being, on experiencing mother hunger or father hunger or feeling like a eugenics project or like they were bought and sold, because they were bought and sold. Don't go look back on Wilberforce and be like, oh, wow, he eradicated slavery, without going, what the F? We are literally buying and selling children right now through contracts in the name of commercial surrogacy, but we're not looking back and calling it a tragedy. We are saying this is progress. So this is a place where you just need to grow. You need to grow. And especially if you're a man, this is an area where you have to step into it because you do have broader shoulders. You are made for war. I am not naturally made for war. I don't like the confrontation. You guys kind of like it. And we actually need you in on this fight because dispositionally, you're probably more wired for this than I am. And so become educated on the topic, become an expert on the topic, and then come what may, you stand for the most vulnerable. It is what good Christian men have done throughout history, and we need you now more than ever.
And be looking, men, obviously I co-sign that, be looking for evidence of your own conscience being seared. There's a story from the New York Post that, this would have been back in April. Heartless Nebraska teen who slit newborn son's throat after secret birth to spend at least 35 years behind bars for gruesome slaying. Yeah. And when you look at the comments on that story, it's all, what an evil, terrible woman, bury her under the jail, death by firing squad, all the things. But guess what? If instead of slitting her baby's throat before birth, if she had walked into an abortion clinic and paid an assassin $500 to do it for him, you would have defended it as her right to choose.
That's right.
So do not give me this nonsense about caring about the least of these when the most least of these are the ones that are in the most trouble. You want to talk about leading causes of death every year? Yeah, heart disease is terrible. Yeah, you have people that die from medical error. That's always in the top 5. Everything pales in comparison to abortion because between 800,000 and 1 million Americans are killed on an annualized basis for a myriad of reasons that don't typically go to the hard cases that most of you will bring up. But I'm not going to go ahead.
Abortion pales in comparison to IVF. Okay? Abortion
that's apparent now.
IVF. So, and IVF presents even more threats. I mean, not only are kids at risk of losing their right to life, they're very often separated from one or both biological parents. They're very often sold through a commercial surrogacy process. So once you're making babies in a laboratory, it's not just their life that's at risk. It's their whole life trajectory that's at risk. So I know this is new. I know it's uncomfortable. Kyle is right. Give him money.
And guys, when it's right, double down because I heard all the things, I got all the negative feedback, and then I did an episode this year called Planned Parenthood kills more children than, IVF kills more children than Planned Parenthood. So it's like, if you thought I was going to go quiet on the IVF front, that's just not what I was built for. But Katy, we have weaved in and out of a bunch of different subjects. I'm so thankful for them before us, for your work that you do there for this book. Again, all that will be in the show notes, guys, so you can go and check them out and support them in any way that you can. But that is all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, I just love strong men, and I'm grateful for strong men. And I feel like, you strong men who are believers are leading a host of captives, of young men out of the terrible culture that we've created that distinctly demonizes them for being male or white or Christian or all of the above. And personally, I've got 2 teenage boys at home, and I say I because my husband is now in the Navy, and so he's out at sea right now. So my husband is obviously very involved in our family, but right now it's me and the boys. And I'm so grateful for the good men all around them at church that they're following online, that are appropriately mocking this culture and all of the Instagram reels that they send to me. Don't stop. Don't stop. Like, we actually need you, good, strong, Christian, virtuous men who are courageous and willing to speak up, even if you lose friends, even if it makes you unpopular, even if, especially if it means you may not get what you want. That is the world that we need.
Let's leave it there, Katy. Let's make sure this isn't the last time we connect. We'll talk again soon.
Perfect.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Katy Faust. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got 3 links for you today. I may throw another one in there, but the 3 links that'll definitely be there is a link to Katy's website, a link to Them Before Us, and a link to where you can buy that book that we talked about, Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. And right there on Amazon on the same page, you'll be able to find her other 2 books as well. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.